everyone, and welcome to another podcast with Nourishing Insights. And I am Beverley Neleta, nutritional therapist and functional medicine practitioner, and I am joined by my colleague Neleta Winter, who is also a nutritional therapist, functional medicine practitioner. And we have the joy of specialising an awful lot in women's hormones. And if you haven't listened already, we have recorded a couple of other podcasts, which are also available on YouTube. On a general one on hormone was the first one, and then the second one on all things fertility. So have a look at them if you haven't already. But today we are going to be talking about menopause, which of course is a hot topic. There's been lots of awareness raising about menopause, but obviously there's more to it than what the hype tells you. So what we're going to do today is to go through how we approach the subject, and hopefully that will give you some food for thought and make you feel a bit more empowered, and also help you to understand how you could possibly work with us as well. The first thing is really, Neleta, we're going to talk about what is menopause and what are the different stages that we go through.
Yeah, and I think this can be quite a sort of an unusual understanding, because a lot of people don't realise that menopause can start a little bit earlier, what we call perimenopause. So some people can start perimenopause as early as sort of the age of 35. And really what we see is the shift in hormones. So the shift in those hormone levels, and they start to decline. So we generally see that from the age of 35. Sometimes it can be 40, 45. But when we sort of hit actual menopause is when we don't see a period for 12 months. And that's when obviously the transition has occurred. So most women are starting to see that sort of those symptoms, that shift from about age of 40 upwards.
Yeah, I mean, I was 40 when I first realised some changes in myself, and then 46 everything just stopped. So I was relatively early, but it does run in families, and in my family we are so late 40s is typical for onset. There are other factors that affect that, stress and many other things, but
it's about 50 generally would be, that's most women would find that they would lose their period for that 12 months onwards.
Exactly. And then of course there's surgical menopause as well, so everybody's different, but these are the basic stages that we look at. And so with that, which are the hormones that are involved in those changes? Because I think, again, that's a topic that people get confused about and think, oh, it's just about estrogen, and the world begins and ends with estrogen and it falls off a cliff. But that's not quite what happens. So what hormones are the ones that we would look at?
Yeah, so obviously we know everybody just talks about estrogen, and apparently that's the only one that's involved in menopause, but we know that there's a lot more. So when we look at perimenopause, when our hormone levels start to decline, it's actually progesterone that starts to decline first. Then we're looking at estrogen, testosterone, cortisol, melatonin, obviously our sleep hormone that everybody thinks of, thyroid. So all of those hormones are actually affected during the menopause.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you start there with progesterone being the first one, because of course very often it's symptoms around that, isn't it, that people would experience, and that might be the first thing that you experience, that there's a change of mood, a bit more, the mental health side comes in, sleep changes. But what are the things you see in practice with that one?
Things like headaches, sleep disturbances, anxiety, low mood, because actually progesterone is sort of our natural antidepressant. So when those levels start to decline, that can have a big impact, but it also affects our periods as well. So we can have irregular periods during the transition of that lowering of progesterone.
Yeah, definitely. And that is the one that in practice, people can often end up the GP with that one. Those changes are starting to happen, but they haven't realized it's actually about progesterone. There could be other things as well, of course, but that's certainly one of them. And then they may be given an antidepressant and assume that it is a depression, whereas actually it's more of a hormonal shift that they're experiencing. And that's where what we do is so powerful, isn't it, Neleta? Because we would automatically look at those things based on age.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's rather than looking at sort of just that symptom, we've got to look at why we've got that symptom. And generally, especially when it comes to women around sort of 40 plus, we know that those shifts in the hormone levels can be impacting on a lot more than just irregular periods. So we know that the mental health is going to be affected dramatically, but sleep is a big one as well. Blood sugar balance, stress levels, those kind of things. So, you know, when we look at the typical symptoms of menopause that most women know about, obviously things like the hot flashes, vaginal dryness, the night sweats, irregular periods, weight gain, we know they're commonly associated with the lowering levels of estrogen. But they're the ones that seem to dominate, where we sort of often forget about, you know, loss of muscle tone, things like that, weight gain, which is associated with testosterone, and then the higher stress levels, which is obviously associated with stress around us, but higher cortisol due to lowering or higher amounts of insulin within the blood. So there's things that can be affected, and rather than just looking at one or two symptoms and trying to target that, it's looking about sort of the whole balance of all of this sort of the hormones that are working synergistically together within the body.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the what always surprises people when they come to us with menopause, or they mention the word menopause, because they think that we're also going to do excuse me, the one size fits all of HRT, and say, well, or some equivalent, that we'll have, you know, sage or black cohosh or something like that, and that we're just going to give them the pill, which will get rid of it all. But of course, it couldn't possibly do that, because there are so many issues involved, so many hormones involved, so many factors, diet, lifestyle, stress. And unless you deal with all of that, the pill, whatever it is, HRT or otherwise, becomes irrelevant. And that's where what we do is so powerful, because even if you're on HRT, and yes, it will have some benefit, but it might not be a pleasant experience for you. You might not get away with it. You might feel you don't tolerate it. You might choose not to do it, or maybe the risk factors in your family for breast cancer and so on and so forth. And so you've decided not to go that route. But whether you're on it or you're not on it, and you've chosen not to for whatever reason, all of those people we work with, irrespective, because they've all got to do the core areas that we address around diet, lifestyle, stress, nutrient deficiencies, thyroid problems. I mean, there are so many things that we delve into that they wouldn't delve into otherwise. They would just be given a product and away you go, but wonder why then they don't feel better, or they might even feel worse. But that's because the subject is so complex. So, you know, going into now, you know, we've mentioned some of the common symptoms, and actually, you know, if you go into it, there's probably about a list of about 50 odd symptoms of potentially of menopause, because the knock-on effect of all these hormones that you beautifully illustrated there, or it is just so wide-ranging. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. But what can we do about it? I mean, I hinted there that it's not the pill for an ill. That approach is not there. So what is the, if we think about diet first of all, you know, a lot of people might have read about phytoestrogens, and think, oh, I need to eat a phytoestrogen then, and that's going to boost me. But how do we approach that, and which ones would we choose?
Yeah, so the thing is, when it comes to hormone balance, obviously when we're going through this transition where our hormones are declining, we know that there's going to be other things that can impact them as well. So if we've already got those levels lowering, and then we've got additional stresses, diet stresses, stress from anywhere else, sleep issues, and that's going to be impacting the levels even more. So when we look at obviously helping to support the body, we have to look at all of the factors that could be contributing to it. And when we look at that, we obviously have to look at nutritional interventions as well. And like you said, phytoestrogens have been in the media for quite a while being talked about. We obviously understand that many sources have said, you know, that there's issues with it. It can create increased risk of breast cancer. We've also got to look at the sources that we're getting these phytoestrogens from. So when we look at phytoestrogens, they are a compound found in foods that can help to balance our estrogen levels. So they act on estrogen receptors. So when we look at that, we think of soy, we think of flax, sesame seeds as well are a phytoestrogen. So when we look at soybeans, obviously we've got to look at good quality organic as well as fermented. So fermented soybeans are a really good source. So that's things like tempeh and natto as well. I will say natto doesn't taste very nice.
Yeah.
Nicest, but we want good quality. And you've got to think that Japanese women have been eating mainly probably fermented soybean, but soybean based products for thousands of years, and they actually have some of the lowest rate of breast cancer in the world. So studies that have shown links, we've really got to look at that and how that's been evaluated. Is it other factors that could be contributing to that? So when it comes to the soybeans, fermented is a good one. So things like tempeh is a fantastic source, but then also things like flax. And flax is a great source of phytoestrogens, but it's also an amazing fibre-rich seed. So it's really good at helping to support the gut as well. But also it's really good at helping the detoxification process. So when we look at our hormones, and I think we obviously spoke about this in our previous chat, is when we use our hormones, we need to get rid of them. And we have to do that through the liver. And the liver is our biggest organ of the body. And I love talking about it. I think it's so powerful. It detoxifies everything that goes on in the body. So whether that's hormones, medication, the alcohol, anything, even the products we put on our skin, anything we inhale, anything goes through the liver and we have to detoxify it. Sometimes that can be a bit sluggish, especially as we get older. We've got more stress going on. We're probably drinking alcohol evenings, taking medication, it can become a bit sluggish. So we need to make sure that's working well. So flax is a great one. It really helps with that detoxification process. So those are wonderful phytoestrogens that we can add in. But obviously we need to make sure that the liver is functioning really well. And that can really help to clear estrogen once it's been used, so that the body can obviously, rather than using the same estrogen that's recirculating, which is often can be often toxic, we need to make sure that's clearing well. So adding in cruciferous vegetables are a fantastic way of supporting liver detoxification. They help that hormonal balance. So they're really good at supporting estrogen balance. So things like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels, collard greens are really amazing foods to add in to help support estrogen balance as well.
All my favourites, fortunately.
Yeah.
And always have been. And I'm one of those people that love sprouts. I know some people love or hate them, but I absolutely love them. And the funny thing is you can eat them raw as well, which I would never thought of years ago, but you can actually grate them into salad.
Yeah,
you can have stir fries, and you know, they're one of those things that often get lost in the fridge, that if you've had them for Sunday roast or something and then you've got a few left, they end up in the bottom of the fridge hidden and you don't use them. But actually they're so powerful as detoxifiers of the liver. So they're great to chuck into your soup, your stir fry, just anything. But get them used because they are your best friend when it comes to hormones. The little sprout is so powerful. So yeah, I think that the other thing that we talk about, of course, is obviously we want to talk about detoxification, and we're thinking about gut health. And one of the areas that is so relevant to this is your gut health history. I mean, when people come to us, the first thing we look at really is gut health, and thinking about are they going to the toilet regularly? Are they passing a stool normally? Maybe they've had IBS, maybe they've had long-term constipation or whatever. But if they're, you know, as you say in a letter, then if they're not clearing that estrogen, if they're not going to the toilet regularly and doing a normal stool, then that estrogen is going to recycle, and then they're going to have problems with hormonal imbalance from there. And that's where some of the difficulties come in. So we actually have a course. So some of you listening may have done the last one, because that was our first ever one that we did from October to December. It was a 6-week course in menopause. And in that, it surprises people that we actually have an entire session, an entire class on gut health, and an entire class on liver health. So I'm not going to begin to touch the sides today in talking about that. But the key thing is that if you've got an issue with gut health, and you know you've had long-term issues, then that is powerful. That really needs addressing. And, you know, if you're not detoxifying properly, we need to be looking at why. And I remember, well, I mean, one thing I will say about this is that often you will read things, or, you know, maybe a doctor has said on something, oh, you don't need to take anything to support your liver detox. Your liver does it anyway. So liver detox becomes irrelevant. And while that's true, your liver is detoxifying and it knows how to detoxify, and it's doing that every second of every day and doing a brilliant job. The trouble is we overwork it. In Neleta, if you saw one of our last ones, Luke used that great analogy of being overworked and underpaid, which I love for the liver, because definitely it's the fact, well, what else is it doing? And, you know, if the liver is dealing with, perhaps you're on multiple drug medications at the moment, perhaps you're taking paracetamol left, right and centre for headaches that you can't seem to get to the bottom of. Perhaps you're drinking alcohol at night and therefore compromising the liver, or, you know, drinking more than you would normally. And so there are lots of things. And then there are environmental toxins as well. There are so many things that impact our liver. And again, the liver requires certain nutrients to be able to detoxify. So if you are deficient in those nutrients and you don't know that, then that's going to cause problems with liver detoxification. So yes, the liver knows what to do, but it needs the tools, it needs the information. And the beautiful thing is that we give the liver those tools through what we do and what we don't do around food, around lifestyle, and just checking a few things and testing a few things. And of course, you know, one of the tests that we run regularly automatically includes as a baseline a liver function test, but also includes B12 and folate, which are critical for liver detox. So it's all of these things that we go into to be able to support that. So yes, gut, making sure that we're going to the toilet every day, but also making sure that we've got all the right tools for liver detox. And I remember, you know, some of you who are from Aberdeen might remember seeing me years ago. When I first started, I used to work in the Nutri Centre, which was based in, it was a big health store where they employed nutritionists. It was really good. They were within usually big Tesco's. So often people would, you know, go around, get their shopping and then come in and ask about a particular product or supplement. And I do remember once a lady coming in and saying, oh, her GP had recommended sage for her hot flushes. Did we have any in stock? And yes, we did. But of course, you know, I could have spoken to her for several hours on why the sage wasn't going to cut it. And the sad thing was, when I looked in the shopping trolley, and this is without any judgment, I mean, this is with total compassion, but basically, God love her, everything in that basket was going to promote imbalance, because it was all processed foods, no fibre to support the gut health, no liver detoxifying foods. There was quite a bit of alcohol in there, lots of biscuits and sweets and crisps and that kind of thing. And you look at that, which is hormonally not going to help anybody. Now, for someone like in that situation, the sage might help a tiny bit, but not really with all that going on. And nor would the HRT either. So whether we're talking synthetic hormones or whether we're talking natural herbs or whatever, either way, we've still got to focus on the same core things around supporting blood sugar, supporting gut, supporting liver, because if we don't do that, we're just pedaling backwards. You know, well, we're just going up the ladder and down the snake again in everything that we do. So we might think we're doing something useful, but it's interesting, this example, because it's also what gives the supplement industry a bad name, because people will read in a women's magazine, oh, take this supplement and it will help with X. And they go and they buy it. And of course, well, there might be issues with the supplement. It might be the wrong dose. It might be poor quality. There might be loads of additives and everything else. But aside from that, even if it is the right dose and it's a nice supplement, the trouble is, because they haven't dealt with all these underlying aspects, they're going to take that supplement and think, I don't believe in that natural health stuff. It doesn't do anything. I didn't feel any better when I did that. Well, of course they didn't feel any better, because they still haven't dealt with all of those underlying issues. And that's something that, you know, we find in practice all the time, don't we, Neleta, that there's that, you know, it's sad really that people, we don't know what we don't know. And I didn't know this and you didn't know this until we both did our training and all of this stuff. And then it's so empowering.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think we often that's what sort of, when we go to the doctor, we're homing in on one symptom and then it's just treating that one symptom. Whereas when you look at it, the symptom is a cause of something else. So as you know, our job is to sort of look upstream and figure out, well, why are we having these symptoms and what can be impacting on it? And like you said, when it comes to the liver, my favourite saying is it's overworked and underpaid, because we require so many nutrients, and often these are going to be from those whole foods. So, you know, omega-3, healthy fats, cruciferous vegetables, B vitamins, so protein-rich foods. But often they can be the ones that are lacking in people's diets. But then we've also got the impact of blood sugar has on the liver, as well as our stress hormones, because as soon as we have any kind of imbalance on blood sugar levels, so if you're finding that you're having to grab coffee or chocolate or something like that mid-afternoon, that's probably where your blood sugar levels have dropped dramatically. And at that time, our stress hormones have to come into play. So cortisol has to come into play to bring glycogen stores back up so that we can bring those blood sugar levels back up. That's more stress on the body. So that's more the liver has to detoxify. Yeah. And then we maybe caffeine and then sugar. That's even more for the body to process. So unfortunately, most people are probably riding a bit of a roller coaster when it comes to their blood sugar, their stress hormones. That's not including the stress we have to deal with. If you think that menopause occurs sort of, you know, when we're in our 40s, you know, perimenopause, most women are dealing with job, family, you know, all the other stresses, social life and everything else, trying to get exercise in there. Oh, I meditate at the same time and get some yoga in. It's quite a stressful time for most women. So I think when we've got that as well, if our body isn't quite equipped, we find everything else a bit more overwhelming, because our body's so overworked having to do what it is having to do every day. And then we're adding all those other things in. Then we find a lot, especially when we see clients, is they say they feel overwhelmed, that stuff that seemed okay before just seems a bit too much. And this is where obviously that approach is looking at everything rather than just looking at that one symptom, and trying to support the body so it's more balanced, so that we're more equipped to deal with those stresses that unfortunately always predict.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, you're absolutely right. And people, we need that being equipped. I like that word, and building resilience. We talk a lot about, because, you know, we are in that situation often professionally. We might have reached a point in our job where that little bit higher, got a bit more responsibility going on. Perhaps we've got children that are teenage or maybe going through university and having challenges. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we might be looking after elderly parents as well. So it can seem as though everything's on top of us as we hit this point of menopause. And we've got too many plates spinning, and these are the things that add. But you know, as you were talking about blood sugar there, and of course, stress and blood sugar, they go together. You know, if you're stressed and somebody offers you a carrot stick, you want to punch them. You know, you do not want to eat healthy food when you're stressed. You want to eat a packet of crisps, you want to eat a cake or anything you can get your hands on, because, you know, when that cortisol rises, you're running from a tiger, you need energy, you need it now. So you're going to reach for those things, and we all know that feeling, and we can all have a laugh about that, but at the same time, it's recognizing those things and understanding the physiology behind it, and understanding why things happen. And I think, you know, a lot of our job with Neleta and I is a bit of a biology lesson, and explaining how the body works and why it does what it does and why we feel the way we do. And when we understand those things, we can deal with ourselves with compassion. And I think instead of feeling guilty for having had something, it doesn't matter. You know, you can have a giggle about it and then move on, because we all are human and we all have those feelings. But it's understanding the impact of stress on blood sugar and on food cravings as well.
Yeah, and that's a big one. I think food cravings is a big symptom that most women struggle with, not just through menopause, but most of the time, because we've got to think we've got fluctuating hormones throughout the month, plus we've got everything else that can be impacting on those fluctuating hormones. And another big one I see is weight gain, particularly around the middle. And we often call that the stress belly, because we're in that blood sugar roller coaster and we're in that higher state of stress. Our body likes to store that sugar or that, you know, that glucose, and often that's in our adipose tissues, which is around our belly. So often I get that when I'm speaking to clients, oh, I'm putting more weight on, and I'm doing everything I can, but we need to address all those other imbalances, because if we're not, the body is going to automatically be in that survival mode, because that's what fight and flight is. It's just the body's natural survival instinct, and that will kick in every time we're having to deal with all the other stresses. Plus, if we're not nourishing the body with what it needs, it can make it a little bit more difficult for the body to be resilient.
Absolutely, and all of that I can relate to, and I certainly have had developed in menopause a cortisol belly. But of course, 6 years ago, my husband was diagnosed with cancer. He got through that, but it was a very stressful period. We were opened the shop at that time, running a business, running a busy clinic, working full time, and get overwhelmed, and then your sleep's affected. You're constantly stressed. And it's at times like that where things just build, and it's almost as if it sneaks in through the back door, and then it's very difficult to get rid of, because life is life, and we're constantly, even if you do your meditation and everything else, you can keep all overall weight down, but things like cortisol belly do become difficult to shift, because it's very much a metabolic issue. It's multiple hormones are affecting that, and stress and sleep being absolutely massive ones. And I know stress and sleep, broken sleep, were definitely factors for me. And all we can do is work on them and offset that as best we can. And yes, we have tricks up our sleeve, and there are supplements that help with these things, but it ultimately with these, it's working on the lifestyle. And how many of us are in a situation where we can take a stretch, a time off work for a few weeks? You might need it, but we can't always do that. It's not always realistic, and you can't stop caring for the people in your life and doing the things you do. It's so hard, and people often have difficult questions to ask. And I can remember several clients over the years thinking, oh, I've been offered this promotion, but you know what, I'm not sure if I'm going to take it, because I'm worried about the implications of that, of extra hours. Am I going to be on my laptop late at night? That's going to affect my hormones. What's the implication for the family? So it's been interesting. And out of those, there have been some people who've come to terms with it and thought, no, I think I can do this, and I can build my resilience, and are there some supplements that can help me, and all of this. And then there are other people who've thought, no, actually, I'm not going to take that job. I'm okay doing what I'm doing. I'm fine enough. I like what I do. I'm just going to stick with that. And I think we all have these kinds of, there's lots of choices that we have to make. And it's all these lifestyle issues that we end up, funny enough, talking a lot about alongside the gut and the liver and the blood sugar and all the hormones and everything else that we talk about. It's massive. It's a big picture. And as I said before, that these courses that we run, again, we said there's a whole session on gut, there's a whole session on liver, there's a whole session on blood sugar, and there's a whole session on stress and sleep. So it's covering all the bases that impact our hormones, and looking at ways that we can become more resilient and get those tools that we need. So now with blood sugar, it was just to say as well, Neleta, that we do develop, don't we, going in, this is another unhelpful thing. I mean, all of us can have at any stage of our life, depending on how we're eating and other things, have issues around blood sugar. But going into menopause, things do seem to change again. Was another reason for the weight gain, is we do develop a bit more insulin resistance.
Yeah, because when we look at our hormones, often people think that our estrogen, progesterone, testosterone are just there as sex hormones, but they actually impact lots of different things, whether that's mood, bone health, but we know blood sugar. So when it comes to estrogen, it can affect the sensitivity of the cell's sensitivity to insulin. So how well the cells respond to insulin. And that can lower. So when estrogen levels lower, that sensitivity lowers as well. So we can get this thing called insulin resistance. So it's almost like the insulin's knocking on the door of the cell, and the cell can't hear it. So what the body does is it produces more insulin to help the cell hear that it's got glucose ready for the cell to use. So we then get this buildup of insulin, which then can increase cortisol as well. So it's it's not something we want to be dealing with, but unfortunately with those lowering levels of estrogen, that can have a big impact.
Absolutely. And it's funny because when I used to do workshops, menopause workshops, one of the questions I used to love asking was, which are the dominant hormones in the body? And of course, most people would say estrogen, that'll be the first one, and progesterone. They would be the ones they would think of, and maybe testosterone. But actually, the dominant ones in truth are insulin, adrenaline, cortisol. These are the dominant ones. These are the ones you can't live without. And so, but the interesting thing about them is when you're dealing with hormone health at any stage, you know, as we've said before in the various talks we've done, they're absolutely central. You know, and particularly so because of these extra nuances going into menopause with the hormones, then we really need to get cortisol, adrenaline, insulin. These are the big boys. These are the big bad guys that we need to get sorted out. And if we work on them, and they do, as we said, work together, because if you're stressed, you're going to eat the cake. So if we work on all of those at the center, at the heart of all of these things, then the domino effect on everything else, you know, we negate that, because of course it's much worse. You know, if we do have spiking cortisol all the time, because that's going to impact our hormones hugely.
Yeah, that's the thing. And we often think that all these hormones are very separate, but they all work in synergy together, and particularly cortisol having an impact on progesterone. So if we're going into perimenopause and progesterone levels are lowering anyway, and we've got high amounts of stress, we make cortisol through progesterone, so we can often lower our levels even more, and that's when we see dramatic impacts on periods, low moods, headaches. So they all really work together, and testosterone's a big one that people often forget about. You know, we often think that it's just a male hormone, but actually it plays a big part in the cycle. So, and we know that starts to lower during perimenopause as well.
Yeah. And that brings us nicely into the next topic, which is talking a bit more about testosterone. Because years ago, I mean, as some of you know, I used to work in the drugs industry, and one of the, and I worked in this sort of menopause area because on the one hand, I worked in osteoporosis because we had a drug for that. But we also, the company at that time, developed a testosterone patch. They also came up with the phrase HSDD, hypoactive sexual dysfunction disorder, which I remember at the time gave us a bit of a laugh, and gave a lot of the GPs definitely a few raised eyebrows and a few giggles over that one, because it was, you know, what ridiculous term. And the drugs industry are very good at coming up with these terms and these new diagnoses. But, you know, it is a very real problem in that when testosterone lowers, which it does do as we go into menopause, then that can have major implications for our health, because for one thing, it affects our mood, affects our energy, affects our libido, but it also affects our bone health as well, which is the one that, again, that people don't think about, because again, with bones, they're automatically thinking it's all about estrogen. But actually testosterone is a big one there. But again, you know, if people are going through these changes, and, you know, perhaps they've developed low mood, anxiety, etc. But sometimes it can be due to changes in testosterone and testosterone levels dropping. And, you know, like with all hormones, there are ways to support that, to offset that, and actually with any and every hormone, stress is always a big one. Managing stress, managing blood sugar, these are always the core central things that we need to do. But there are also nutrients as well that affect testosterone production. So sometimes we've got to address nutrient deficiencies around that. And also, you know, changes in our ability to exercise. I mean, inactivity can be an issue as well, can't it, Neleta, with testosterone? And that's something we often end up talking about in practice.
Yeah, so the thing with testosterone is it often, when it lowers, often leads to loss of muscle tone. And one of the best ways, and this is what I speak to a lot of my clients about, is the best way to improve testosterone levels, whether that's after menopause, perimenopause and even before, is to actually include strength-based exercise, so weight-bearing exercise, because the more you increase lean muscle, the more your body is being told to produce testosterone. So that's a great way to help increase that. So that's just something that most people wouldn't know, because they're relying on either whether it's HRT or a supplement to try and boost those levels. But there's lots of things that you can do lifestyle-wise that can have a big impact.
There are, and I think it's important to re-emphasize that, because you know, a lot of people, if we mention muscle mass and bone health and exercise and all of these things, if people are going through menopause and they're feeling just absolutely awful, you know, they're at their worst point and they're exhausted, and you mention the word exercise and they run for the hills and think, oh no, I couldn't do that. But fortunately, if we go back to what we said, it goes back to the beginning again: manage the stress hormones, manage the blood sugar, thinking about cortisol, thinking about adrenaline. Then if we work on those first, if we think about sleep first, you know, if we look at the lifestyle, if we look at those factors that are impacting them currently, are they getting to bed early enough? Are they scrolling on their phone late at night? Are they watching the TV? Are they doing things that suppress their melatonin? All of these things, because of course, if we're not sleeping right, that's going to cause insulin resistance for one thing, but also it's not going to make you want to do exercise. It's going to make you feel exhausted, because we're all of us just, you know, busy, getting on with our lives, and feels as though we're always on the treadmill of life, and genuinely sometimes just don't have energy to go for a walk. And especially if you've had a virus or something like that. You know, we had a nasty thing in beginning of January, and then the whole of that month I had all these grandiose plans for walking at night and all of this after my dinner. Did I do it? No, not at all. But I just couldn't. I mean, I was literally finishing off with clients and having to have a lie down at the end of the day because I had that post-viral fatigue. And sometimes you've just got to deal with how life just what it deals you, and you just have to do your best. But you know, we all have these issues. But the nice thing with testosterone is that, again, working on all of these other factors that we've said, they're all going to help anyway. And guess what? When you feel better, when you do all these other things, these baseline things around the diet and, you know, looking at underlying hormone issues and other imbalances, then eventually you think, actually, I do feel like going for a walk tonight. Yeah, I feel great. I feel okay now. And that's really part of the hand holding that we have with people, because we can look at the story and think, goodness me, you know, I wouldn't want to be going for a walk if I was in your shoes right now. So, you know, it's that tailored, that individualized care that we give, where we are totally with you in whatever stage you're at, and trying to help you to get to the point where you can do these things. So then bone health, I think that nicely brings us on to a little bit more. We kind of mentioned that, but I think that what I would say is that, again, and we do talk about bone health in the course as well. And of course, a lot of people, again, think calcium, don't they, with bone health? You've got to drink more milk, got to eat more cheese. Or they think estrogen with bone health. And then they might think, oh, well, I'm already doing HRT, so my bones will be fine because I've already got estrogen. But that's only part of the story, because the hormones that affect bone health are actually all the ones we talked about, aren't they? So we've got estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, cortisol. The stress hormones are big. You know, stress-induced osteoporosis is a huge thing. Then we've got the individual melatonin. I just one I've missed out there. Melatonin is another one that surprises people. But again, sometimes that can be the reason why very, very low melatonin behind our changes in bone health. And I've done a few ladies over the years with Dutch tests, funny enough, where cortisol and melatonin and DHEA, they have been the big ones in their particular story. And at various stages actually with those ones. But yeah, we really, really need to be thinking about the hormones, but also with the bone health, thinking about the nutrients. It's not just calcium, it's also magnesium and boron. Vitamin D, absolutely huge. Now, vitamin D really should be under the heading of a hormone, strictly speaking, because it is a hormone. But again, combining vitamin D with K2, so we're making sure that when you take vitamin D and your calcium elevates, then the calcium is going out to the bones where we want it to go for bone health, and not creating potentially cardiovascular plaques, which we don't want. But K2 is very good at redirecting the calcium and making sure it does that. So there's all of these things and more. But bone health is a much bigger topic than people expect, isn't it, Neleta? It's always the one that surprises people.
And I think that's one of the ones that a lot of women worry about in regards to more of the long-term menopause. Obviously, when we sort of the symptoms that we get during that transition, it's more further out, further along, are we going to be getting those symptoms of osteoporosis? And rather than sort of looking at, okay, maybe just HRT or just calcium, we need to be looking at the full picture and what else can be impacting on that bone health. And there is more and more information out there that we're starting to hear that we need more than just calcium when it comes to bone health. And vitamin D is a big one, and we know that, it is we've got vitamin D receptors throughout the body, so that's a really important one. But like you said, magnesium, boron, vitamin K, so all those things that we need for bone health that most people don't realise, but they're things that we're going to be getting in our diet. But most of the time, these can be lacking. So it's just taking these little factors, and most of these things, although we're talking about single nutrients, most of these are all in the same kind of foods.
Yes.
So when we're talking, it's about looking at the diet as a whole, and those little changes that we can make. What things can we add in rather than eliminating? And just those tools that you can take. So when you're looking at your meal, okay, is it colourful? Does it have protein? Does it have healthy fats? Are we looking at some complex carbohydrates rather than going, okay, have I got magnesium? Have I got,
That's right. Yeah.
And it's just about implementing. And that's what we do when we talk to our clients, is we talk about the kind of foods they like, what they like to enjoy, rather than just it being very generic. We want to talk about, we want you to be including the foods that you enjoy, the meals you enjoy, and obviously the food your family are going to enjoy. You don't want to be eating a different meal to everybody else.
No,
and it's something, the whole lifestyle of everybody, really.
Yeah, totally. And it's nice just to blend things together in a nice way, and encourage what is going on and what they are eating regularly, which is great. And you want to develop that, and then just add things in it. Sometimes it's simple tweaks, but it's the fact you do it regularly. It's that you always include flax seeds, as we said at the beginning there. That if you're having porridge daily or some kind of muesli or whatever, just add the flax seeds in daily. You can even bake flax seeds, but it's finding ways where you would always do these, or cruciferous vegetables, that you would always have either cauli or broccoli or sprouts or whatever, but you include one or other regularly within a soup, within a meal, within a stir fry. But you're thinking about just rattling these things out, and eventually when these things become more familiar, you do them with ease.
Yeah, and that's the thing, it's creating these new habits and trying to incorporate them so it comes to be a norm. So every time you look at your meal, I've got some green in there, I've got some red, I've got some seeds, I've got some whole grain, protein, healthy fats, and all of that will just be part of it, rather than going, okay, have I got everything? Do I,
That's right.
We want to provide people.
That's it. And then the last thing that we mentioned, again, that there are a lot of other things we could talk about, but the one I would include is thinking about changes in, urogenital health, thinking about vaginal health, as the loss of estrogen is then going to create problems with around vaginal dryness. But with that comes greater risk of infection. So whether it's bacterial vaginosis, thrush, whether it's UTI as well. Urinary tract infections. And Neleta and I, we work now, we have an area of specialism we've developed over the past couple of years, and we deal with people across the ages with chronic UTI. But it can begin in menopause for the first time. You might have never had a UTI in your life, and all of a sudden you think, oh, where on earth this come from? But part of that is because as we don't have, with that vaginal dryness, we're not as protected from infection as we were. And then we can become just more prone to these infections. And you know, it might be happen as a one-off, but for some poor souls, and these are the people that we're dealing with more often than not, is that it becomes chronic, it becomes an embedded infection, and it can take a long time to shift. So sometimes we're looking at all of these things. And yes, there are supplements that will help. Obviously, you can take vaginal creams and pessaries. There are things that people do use for this sort of thing, and then there are particular herbals and supplements, things like shatavari, that we would recommend for vaginal dryness, or sea buckthorn is another well-known one. But the trick with all of these things is not about saying, well, here's a product which does X. It's about thinking, well, you know, what's your individual story? And you know, there are lots of issues around genetics, around your past medical history, maybe previous surgery, maybe issues around collagen. There are lots of things that affect that area. And so we look into all of that, but we also test as well. So a common test that we do run would be vaginal screening, which we can do just itself. But we also sometimes, obviously, if there's bladder infections, if there's UTIs or interstitial cystitis, because it may be, you know, if someone had a chronic problem, often that would be referred to as interstitial cystitis, and often there's an assumption behind that it's a non-bacterial, but actually that there are always bacteria involved, and there are other reasons why, sometimes without bacteria, as to why you might have bladder pain, but you know, that gets into a whole rabbit hole. But usually there is some kind of bacteria, and we would be wanting to look at what was going on and try and eradicate those, because obviously if we don't, then it's going to lead to chronic bladder problems further down the line. So that's another aspect of our work, which we do anyway, but it also happens to be relevant to menopause, doesn't it?
Yeah, so often when we see, and if you even look on sort of, you know, the NHS website, it's categorized as women that hit, you know, that have gone through menopause that go through UTIs. And that's because obviously we've got that lowering of estrogen, but we know that that's not necessarily the only thing. We know that that can occur young well, but we know that that's going to be more generally associated when we hit that transitional period.
Yeah. So I think to finish off then, if we just sort of mention a bit more about testing, because obviously what kind of testing would we run? I mean, we mentioned in previous ones a lovely tool that we have called the Dutch test, which is nothing to do with Holland. I should say it stands for Dried Urine Test Comprehensive Hormones. So it's very easy to do at home, and we do 4 tests across the day, because we're also looking at your cortisol, your stress hormone, and mapping that out. And also potentially through the night as well, if you do go through the night. But it's a great test, because we're looking at the estrogen, the progesterone, the testosterone. We're looking at the stress hormones, the cortisol, the DHEA. We're looking at the male sex hormones in some detail, those androgens. We're looking at how you detoxify. So, you know, before we mentioned about how it's not just about knowing the levels of estrogen, it's also knowing how you metabolize it. So it's looking at the liver. And again, we're looking at that in an awful lot of detail. So how the liver's able to detoxify. And then we'll look at a load of other tests as well, including melatonin, and also some of the nutrients and other things relevant to hormones as a whole. So they're phenomenal tests. Another test that we would run regularly would be a thyroid screen. So when it comes to hormones, we would always include thyroid, and we would run that first, because you need to understand what the thyroid's doing before you can interpret the other things. And again, ours is much more comprehensive, as you would expect. And, you know, we are looking at T3, we're looking at the antibodies, as well as the standard TSH-T4. So, you know, to get a full picture, these are the ones that we would regularly look at. And then, fortunately, within the thyroid screen, it happens to have those things I said before, like liver function, B12, folate, also vitamin D, which is another hormone which is relevant to so many things. It also looks at your cholesterol, your blood sugar. So, you know, we're getting a real picture of that metabolic health. So if we're thinking about weight problems, and it's interesting, because a lot of people appear at our door in menopause, actually, because of weight management issues, don't they? Yeah. but they're not realizing that actually it's to do with this whole picture. It's thyroid, it's stress, it's sleep, it's insulin resistance, all the things we've spoken about that are related to that. And of course they think, oh, well, they just eat a bit less and exercise a bit more, that's going to do it. Or they run into the low fat, low sugar nonsense diet and buy everything with the word diet on it, which I always say, if anything has the word diet on it, throw it straight in the bin, because it's very damaging for your metabolic health. And so it's all of these traps we can easily get into, which is such a shame. But it's, you know, the good news is that with the right testing and the right support, and looking at the big picture, then we can get to the root of these things properly and help you. And I suppose lastly on HRT, we're not against HRT. Sometimes we recommend that people do need to have a little bit of this or a little bit of that to support them, and sometimes that is very relevant. But occasionally, as we know, not everybody wants to do it, not everybody can do it. There are lots of factors there, but whatever stage that you're at and whatever choices that you've made, you still have to do all the things that we've talked about, and we've still got to check and test the other things. So we need to know why. And if you have had a history of poor hormonal imbalance, you know, if you've had issues around endometriosis, fibroids, polycystic ovarian syndrome, already know that you've got a thyroid issue or whatever, you know, or you're somebody with chronic bowel issues, you know you've got an issue with IBS for years, or you've had chronic constipation or whatever. If you're in that category, you are going to be one of those people who will end up feeling a bit rubbish on HRT, because you're going to have those issues, as we said, around detoxification and around all of the other aspects. So, so whichever stage you're at, that, you know, we're here to support you to navigate through all of those things and make sense of it all. And we also, you know, if you don't want to do the standard HRT, if you're interested in bioidentical hormones, we can also refer on to a GP that we work with who is in London, but we refer clients to for whichever hormone is going to be necessary, and then we can send on our reports that we've done, our Dutch test or whatever it might be. We'll pass those details on and our concerns to her, and then she will take it from there. So it's a really a supportive, well-rounded service actually that we offer for menopause, and it works really, really well. And for both of us, it's an area we both really enjoy working in, don't we?
And just touching on that in regards to HRT, I actually think the Dutch test is really beneficial, because rather than it being a sort of a stab in the dark and let's try this, let's add a bit of this, we'll try this for a bit, if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. It's giving you the tools before you make that decision of where you're going in regards to HRT. So it can give you an idea of where your imbalances are and where to start off with, rather than just it being, let's give it a go and see what happens. So I think that's really important as well. Yeah.
And that's a really good point to finish on, because unless we work with all of that in the background, then potentially we're not going to do, you know, we're setting ourselves up for a fall, if you like, if those problems are there. Because we carry through, you know, if you have had fibroids or whatever, and you've, you know, that hormone imbalance doesn't disappear, and or doesn't disappear just because you've removed the thyroid, the fibroid. You know, the underlying imbalances are still going to be there, and that's where we come in, because we're delving deeper and looking at where those problems are, working through them one by one, kicking over those stones, getting all the ducks in order, and then maybe going on and having your HRT after that would be a much better way of doing it ultimately, if only people knew that. So I hope that that has answered a lot of your questions. And do look out for our course, the next one, our next menopause course is going to be running in April, so you can look out for that. And actually, it was lovely, the last one. It was a really lovely group of ladies. We really enjoyed it. And you do get advice on diet. You get diet sheets and all sorts of supportive things along the way. We also include meditation and yoga, lots of things as additional things in addition to the classes. But that's really nice. Plus, what was lovely is that we had ladies from at all stages. Some people who were just going into it or thought they might just be hitting that age, and they maybe noticed 1 or 2 changes, and they just wanted to be, you know, forewarned is forearmed kind of thing, be prepared. And I thought that was fantastic that they wanted to do that straight away. And then those who are sort of right in the middle of things, and then those that are post-menopause, and obviously we're concerned at that stage of, you know, what are the things that, and it's all the same stuff really, it's all the same, at whatever stage you're at, it's all the same core stuff we need to be addressing. So it was really nice, and it was really interesting conversation as well, as when we had the Q&As, when the ladies joined in and shared their experiences as well, and especially the ones who'd kind of been through it and come out the other end and were able to talk about things that had helped them. So it was really lovely. Really enjoyed it. A very supportive environment. So lots of stuff there. But anyway, hopefully, if you want to know more, Neleta and I also do discovery calls. So if you're not sure about something you want to talk through, you can book one of those anytime. They're free of charge, and you can have a chat with either of us, and yeah, talk about your individual case, and we can help you to talk through how we would work with that, basically, and go from there. But I hope you've enjoyed today. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.